Hey guys, welcome back to PWNX. So today we are going to look at one of the latest vulnerability on Spring framework, and it's about Spring Core, and it's called Spring4Shell. So what is pretty much in few words Spring4Shell? Spring4Shell is a vulnerability in Spring framework, and we will see after what Spring framework is, but is one of the most popular Java framework. And this vulnerability in particular enable remote code execution RC using class loader hatches. So there is some kind of class injection through this class loader hatches to manipulate attributes and object classes. From what we know, and also I guess so many people they saw many proof of concept, many Docker files online. The exploitation of this vulnerability requires a combination of Spring, Java that could be like 11, version 11, 9 also, and Tomcat. So I would say like a pretty big range of web instances, web services. So before to jump straight forward on the vulnerability, I prepare some slide to give some kind of introduction about this vulnerability. So we will go like step by step to understand exactly all the necessary small point, access point, we can call it, to understand this vulnerability. So we will go to look, for example, what is the Spring framework. We will go to look what the POJOs are. We will go to look what a binding parameter is. What does it mean to bound a parameter? So we will go to look all this kind of stuff, and in the final we will make a recap of this vulnerability, and there will be the demo part in the final. So yeah, I will say that we can start with the presentation. So pretty much, what is Spring framework? So Spring is an open source framework, and what we can say immediately is that Spring allows rapid and I will say easily and also quickly development for Java applications. Yeah, particularly also we can say for web application. One of the things that we can say, for example, here is that with Spring, Tomcat is a very popular web server written in Java, and the thing is that Tomcat most of the time is embedded or is embedded also in Spring Boot. So this is one of the reasons that where you find Spring, I'm pretty sure you will find also Tomcat. As you can see from the slide, like the module, or I would say like the structure of the Spring framework, pretty much is consists in 20 modules, and now we can see they are divided like in the core container, we have the data access integration, and we have the web. So I will say that each module is doing his property job. We have all the core side, especially the bug was inside the Spring core, so we are working here. And on the core container we can find the beans core, so the expression language, so everything that is regarding like the core of the functionality of the framework. After we have the data access integration, the JDBC like connection to the database and other stuff, and also we have like the web part. The web is like the web layer is consisting of web servlets. As you can see, the Spring framework is doing a very quickly all deployment of Java application. So once we understand that using Spring is very easy to deploy web application written in Java, now we will go to understand how it's possible to exploit this vulnerability and what is going on, what is concerning this vulnerability, what we need to exploit this vulnerability. So there are some things that we have to know before to go a little more deeper on the vulnerabilities. And what are these things? So first of all, we have to know, or we have to understand what a POJO is in Java. We have to understand what is binding a parameter in the Spring core, or also like normally in Java, and we will see after that this particular vulnerability is using some kind of bypass to load the class loader class. We will go to look specifically which bypass was used. So when we talk about POJO, a POJO, we are describing a class, a method that pretty much has no reference to any particular frameworks. It doesn't have any kind of dependencies. In fact, it doesn't depend to any framework. So the thing is that we can, for example, create a Pojo. As you can see from the slide, we are creating a PWNX Pojo class, and the thing is that this class, for example, can be used by any Java programs, as is not tied, for example, to any framework. This is a Pojo. It's meant from plain old Java object. Going to the next slide, we have to understand what a parameter binding is. Like during the web application development, it's maybe useful, or sometimes you need also to extract parameters from request. Request that maybe can be post request, maybe can be get request. You need to extract parameter. You need to extract like headers, or maybe post payload, get payload, and that's also. The Spring core make the parameter extraction very easy through the request mapping annotation. So, for example, in this request we can see the request mapping. Here we have the request param. So this is a post request. We have the request method here. We have the request param, and for each param we are taking, we are extracting the parameter. Okay. The thing is that the request parameter annotation, the request parameter method, looks like, and maybe could be also pretty straightforward, pretty nice to use it. The thing is that maybe could be good for maybe 1, 2, 3 parameters, but imagine maybe when you have to handle more, maybe like 5, 10, 20 parameters, maybe it could be, a little overwhelming, when the parameters, grow a little bigger. So in this case we can bind parameters to some Pojo, for example, classes. How we can do it on Spring? So pretty much the difference from the first one and the second one: on the first one we are using still the request mapping, we are using the request param annotation. Here still we are using the request mapping still from the Spring framework, so we can see that we are mapping a directory on feedback. We have still the request method post. But the things that you can see here is that in I will say very easy way, for example, in this case it is a post request, but the parameter here, they are bound on the properties of the object. In this call, the object is called feedback. These parameters, like get email, get username, get feedback, and then get title, they are bound directly to an object, and this object is called feedback. These things maybe could allow some potential flaw, some potential vulnerability, because it's how we can say, it's directly exposing this kind of class to the mapping. So potentially an attacker can call this class, and here is the vulnerability. The vulnerability is the combining of the Pojo, so using Pojo and using binding. So when you use, for example, a Pojo like the feedback class, and when we use a binding annotation, I will say, so all these parameters that maybe we are taking from the post request, maybe we are taking from the get request, are bound, and these parameters, they become a properties of an object, and this object is of a Pojo class. Here the things maybe could be a little worse. The thing is that another element we can say that we need here specifically to exploit this vulnerability, we have, for example, the request param we told before on the example, on the first example. There is another also annotation that is called the request body. Here, for example, to exploit the Spring4Shell, we need a Pojo class. On this Pojo class, some parameters need to be bound of this object. This particular class should not have the request body. What is the request body annotation? So the request body annotation pretty much is telling to the class that the request is not, or maybe is, a set, from example, like of parameters like email, like username. So the request body is telling which kind of data we are expecting on the body, so on the payload of our post request. And these things specifically, when it's missing on the Pojo class, where these parameters are bound on this object, here we have the class injection. But we have to understand. So the thing is that Spring, or the Spring core, actually he's doing some kind of checking, some kind of parsing. And actually you can see that here on this particular function, on this if statement, he's checking for the class.classLoader and the class.protection domain. The thing is that this functionality was done because, like, in 2010 was found another similar vulnerability where a remote attacker was able, for example, to inject remote classes or maybe call local classes instances that they were on the web application directly accessing from the class loader method. The thing is that we can bypass this kind of protection. How we can bypass? We can bypass using the get module. In this case, using the get module, we can write again the class loader like class module dot class loader. In this case, we are passing and we are bypassing this if statement, and we can inject our malicious classes. So pretty much I can understand it's pretty much confusing, but let's make a recap of all these vulnerability. So we have, for example, some HTTP parameters on post request. If Spring is using, for example, some request mapping on that, for example, endpoint, and with that parameters, if these parameters are bound directly to a PWNX class, so this parameter they convert in an object. Here actually we can't directly call the class loader object because actually Spring is doing some kind of preventing. So how we can bypass this? We can bypass using the get module method, the get module class, and we can write the class loader loading like class.module.classLoader. The thing is that, how we told before, sometimes or most of the time Tomcat is it's bound directly with the Spring, as they work very good together and they are very easy to be deployed. And the things here becomes a little tricky. Actually, on Tomcat server, the class loader functionality give us the access to call a get resources class, and this get resources class give us the property to inject reference on the HSLog valve. What is this HSLog valve? Particularly on Tomcat, this particular class can allow a user, a remote attacker, to inject or maybe to overwrite the logs. So we have a class injection. If, for example, we are using a Tomcat, this class injection, this class loader injection, is giving us the opportunity to inject some reference on the HSLog valve class. This HSLog valve class gives us the opportunity to change some property on the Tomcat web server. So actually is giving us arbitrary file execution. So if we can arbitrarily write or override some kind of properties on the Tomcat web server, what we can do? For example, we can change the directory of where this log will be saved, and instead to be some kind of logs, we can write what? We can write some JSP web shell, and actually Tomcat is automatically executing JSP a file, so here maybe potentially we have directly RC. So this is pretty much the vulnerability, guys. I can understand that maybe it could be a little tricky to understand what the PWNX are, how these parameters they are converted in object through this binding of parameters on these PWNX classes, but we can understand this vulnerability on Spring using also Tomcat web server. For example, we can find a post endpoint on this Spring application. We can submit, and we have to submit a request, so a post request to reconfigure, so we can override, for example, the Tomcat output of the logs, for example, in some arbitrary JSP file. There we can, for example, triggering and write this log. Instead of producing log, we can write and create a JSP file, for example, with some malicious code. Executing the JSP file via the HTTP, in this case, we can have RC. So, to make a recap from the condition, we need special variable, they are exposed. So yes, we need a class, a PWNX class, and this parameter, these HTTP parameters, should to be bound of this PWNX class. We thought also the PWNX class should not be cleared or should not have this kind of request body annotation, so we can inject any kind of data that we want on the body request. We told also the Spring framework use a Tomcat to deploy Java OS web application. Using the Tomcat and using the class loader, we can access and overwrite the log through the access log valve class. Overwriting this log, we can put on some accessible directory. We can write inside this log some kind of JSP file, some malicious code, and pretty much we have RCE. So yeah, pretty much that's it, the vulnerability. So yeah, we can directly jump on the demo side. So guys, yeah, here we are on the demo part. We will go to look the one-shot lab from the PWNX playground. It's called Spring Camp. So actually, yeah, we can log in on the playground on PWNX, going on the pwnx.io, on the play, and here we have the one-shot lab. Yeah, and that's all. Yeah, we have the Spring Camp is a one-shot, so one flag to retrieve, and was available only on the weekend, on the last week. So yeah, actually we can log in, you know, with our VPN, and this is pretty much the application. So the application is not presenting so many functionality, I will say. We have a normal login page, not so many endpoint. I tried to fuzz something, I did some kind of brute force, but nothing was found. What we can do is we can intercept with burp suite, activating Foxy proxy here, intercepting the burp, and we can see, for example, going forward, yes, we have this reservation status request. Actually, I can send this request to the repeater one, and we can go a little forward, closing the intercept. Yeah, here we can see that reservation status is giving us like response like available, and yeah, pretty much this is the, I will say, the endpoint that could be potentially vulnerable to our Spring4Shell. So actually, how we can exploit it, or how we can verify that that particular endpoint is vulnerable to Spring4Shell. So basically, we can, you know, there are so many POC online, some very Python script. Actually, what I want to do first is like injecting maybe with the curl request, so like manually, to see if we can we are able, you know, to override the file log of our Apache Tomcat. And maybe, you know, we can have some kind of really small proof of concept, and to see that maybe we are really able to write a JSP file. So how we can do it? So we can go on, we can open a terminal, and I will pass this sentence, this payload. So let's analyze a little together what is going on here. So actually here we have a post request of our vulnerable application. We have a post request, and we have also our class injection. Let's analyze this together. So we have, for example, I will read like from the first one, we have the pipeline first pattern, and this class is the pattern that will be written the log file. So an attacker potentially will write here the malicious code, the web shell, the reverse shell, instead, for example, of the pattern. Okay, going after, we have the first dot suffix, and in this the suffix is like the class that will determine the log file extension. Is in the example we are putting, of course, JSP, because we need to execute this log file, so we need to run it like a JSP file. Okay, after we have the directory. What is the first directory? The directory is the path to which the log file normally in Tomcat are written. Okay, in standard Tomcat, normally the normal environment is like web app / root. Here, for example, we can change, we can put web apps / my app. So after we can go on the application and write like on the full directory / my app / the file. Which file is here? We have the next one is like the first dot prefix. The first dot prefix is what? It will determine very easily the log file name. So we did and we declare before the suffix that is JSP. So we are declaring a log on web app / my app directory okay, endpoints. That is a JSP file, and the name of this JSP file is called rc. The last one is the file date format. As you can see, we left blank because, I mean, you know, we don't need like the timestamp. So the file for date format is regarding from the timestamp of the logs, and in this case we don't need it. So okay, so let's send it, and let's see what he will give us. So actually we can send a post request. We can see that the application, the server is replying us like available. We can go on my app /rc.jsp, and hopefully we can see our small proof of concept. Yes, we can see it. So yeah, we can see our small proof of concept. So now let's try the exploit. I will put on the description the Python script. So it's like exploit PI. We can pass the URL of the application, and let me copy this one. Yes, copy link address, paste it, sending. We can see that the exploit, he will make his work, and actually he will give us hopefully a web shell. As you can see, shell JSP with a parameter. So actually this is our web shell where we can run, you know, like command, and potentially here we can have rc. And as we can see here, yes, we are www.data. So actually, yes, the exploit went pretty straightforward, and here we can retrieve our flag. Let's see who we are. We are www.data. Maybe we can see also where we are. Okay, we are in temp app. We can go to grab our flag. We can go in home. There is user, so maybe inside user there will be for sure our flag txt. So easily we can do a cut of our flag, and that's all. We have our flag, and we resolved the lab. So guys, in conclusion of this lab, I will say that was pretty nice, pretty interesting to see how to exploit like manually before Spring4Shell, after going with this Python script. And yeah, actually I will say this video is everything. I hope that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, put a like on the video, comments below, and yeah, let's see on another video. Bye!